How did we get here? How did some nations get to this point where there is now a push for same-sex marriage? We will look at the journey in other countries and its impact on the citizens of those countries. Previously, all of these countries had sodomy or buggery laws. In England, the change began in 1957 when a government-sponsored committee, commonly referred to as the Wolfenden Committee, recommended that homosexual behavior between consenting adults in private should no longer be a criminal offense. 10 years later, in 1967, the buggery law was repealed. Then in 1998, in order to prevent the promotion of homosexuality in government-funded schools, Section 28 of the Local Government Act was passed. However, that law came under pressure from homosexual groups, leading to its repeal in 2003. In 2006, the Equality Act was passed, followed in 2007 by the Sexual Orientation Regulations passed pursuant to the Equality Act. These regulations prohibit discrimination in the provision of goods, facilities, services, education, and public functions on the ground of sexual orientation. What the regulations have actually done is to force persons to treat the homosexual lifestyle as being normal, with punishment for those who do not comply. Let us look at what this has meant for England. Well, even before the sexual orientation regulations were passed, the law was being interpreted in favor of the homosexual cause. Let me use the story of 69-year-old Harry Hammond to illustrate this point. In 2001, Hammond was beaten by a group of 30 to 40 persons while preaching. He was arrested for breach of the public order. The allegation was that he had displayed a sign which was threatening, abusive, or insulting. The sign actually read, "Jesus gives peace. Jesus is alive. Stop immorality. Stop homosexuality. Stop lesbianism. Jesus is Lord." His attackers were not charged. Instead, they were the witnesses in the case. The court found him guilty and ordered him to pay a fine along with costs. Or maybe, if you could find Eunice and Owen Johns, who had fostered children 15 times before, they would tell you how shocked they were when in 2009 they were not allowed to foster a child, all because they could not endorse homosexuality as being normal and good. They had a rude awakening. Then again, you may want to ask Leslie Pilkington, a counselor who in 2012 was demoted because she dared to make her services available to an undercover journalist posing as a man who said he was struggling with unwanted same-sex desires. He then reported her to a professional association who stripped her of her senior accredited status. You see, you need to understand that in many of these countries, the right to privacy has been twisted to provide legal protection for consensual homosexual activity. Yet, in those same countries, it would appear that this right to privacy does not extend to counseling in private between two consenting adults. England's journey, which began with allowing consenting adults to do what they want in private, is at the point where the state has now become an agent of the homosexual agenda by requiring the public to stamp the homosexual lifestyle with the seal of approval. Now let's examine what has happened in Canada. In 1969, the Pierre Trudeau government decided to repeal their sodomy laws. You will recall that was Pierre Trudeau who uttered the infamous words, "There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation." In 1982, Canada adopted a Charter of Rights. Then in 1999, same-sex civil unions were declared legal by the Supreme Court. The Minister of Justice, Anne McLennan, tried to placate the Canadian people by saying that the definition of marriage would not be affected by this ruling of the courts. Yet, 6 years later, the Canadian Parliament legitimized same-sex marriage. Where is Canada now? Canada now protects sexual orientation both by its Charter of Rights, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, and by provincial human rights legislation. How have Canadians been impacted? Ask parents who objected to homosexual material being included in the curriculum. The court ruled that their religious objections could not justify the exclusion of such material. In Quebec, all children, including children in private schools and in home schools, have to be put through a curriculum that teaches that homosexuality is normal. So do you see what has happened? Bedroom politics has changed the entire fabric of Canadian society. What started in the bedroom with the repeal of the sodomy law has now overtaken Canadian society. You will recall at the outset, we quoted Pierre Trudeau as saying that the state has no place in the bedroom. Well, what has happened in Canada is that this bedroom now rules the state. Perhaps you may think that this can only happen in Europe and North America. Not so. Let's look at South Africa's journey. South Africa became the 5th country in the world and the first in Africa to legalize same-sex marriage. It was also the first country in the world to constitutionally protect sexual orientation. This was done in the 1996 Constitution. In 1998, the Constitutional Court declared sodomy laws unconstitutional. Then in 2005, the Supreme Court directed Parliament to allow same-sex marriage. What is the situation in South Africa now? Ask South African Member of Parliament, the Honorable Joanne Downs, who used the television appearance to criticize the hosting of the Mr. Gay World event on Easter Sunday 2012 in Johannesburg. It is reported that the South African Human Rights Commission is now considering a complaint made against Mrs. Downs for her remarks, including her statement that homosexuality is one of many sins. Now let us take a look closer to home. Let's see how the USA began their same-sex journey. The big legal push for same-sex rights occurred with the 2003 case of Lawrence versus Texas, when the Supreme Court declared sodomy law across the USA unconstitutional. At that time, there were still 13 states with sodomy laws. Where is the USA on this journey now? Currently, in 2013, there is a concentrated drive by both President Obama and gay rights activists for same-sex marriage to become legal in the entire USA. The matter is now being heard by the Supreme Court. How have Americans been impacted? Ask Crystal Dixon, who was fired in 2008 from her job. She dared to write in the local newspaper objecting to the comparison being made between civil rights victims and those who practice the homosexual lifestyle. Or you could ask the parents who cannot withdraw their children from those classes at school which portray homosexuality as normal. Or you could ask Hands-On Originals, Christian Outfitters, a t-shirt maker in Lexington, Kentucky, who in 2012 was reported to the Human Rights Commission for failure to make t-shirts for a gay pride march. According to Mr. Adamson, the owner of the t-shirt company, small business owners are being forced into producing a product with a message that conflicts with their beliefs and consciences. It seems clear from the cases we have reviewed that the journey towards same-sex marriage and punishment for those who will not embrace and endorse a homosexual lifestyle can start in one of two ways. Either by allowing for sexual orientation as a prohibited ground for discrimination, or by repealing the sodomy or buggery laws. It is only because of the existence of our buggery law and the non-inclusion of sexual orientation as a protected category from discrimination that these things have not yet happened in Jamaica. The buggery law also allows for the possibility of reparative therapy for those who struggle with unwanted same-sex desire. What does international law have to say about the buggery law? According to Professor Vassiani, former Deputy Solicitor General and former principal of the Norman Manley Law School, in an article printed by the Gleaner in 2006, and I quote, "There is no treaty that expressly states that homosexual sex must be regarded as lawful," end of quote. Note that homosexual acts between adults are illegal in 41 of the 54 members of the Commonwealth. We have also heard that the buggery law fuels violence against homosexuals. We say simply that violence against all persons is always to be denounced.